Hi and welcome to Jessie James Beads. My name is Jem and today I'm here with the goddess Mayahuel, goddess of the agave plant. So I've got an earring to create with you. You may have noticed I've just got one in at the moment. How would you like to join me down at the board? We'll take a look at the mix and we'll make a pair to go with this. From the Jessie James Beads Goddess Collection, I bring you the goddess Mayahuel, the Aztec goddess of the agave, and what an effortlessly elegant collection of colours we have. There's earthy tones, the sky and water, absolutely beautiful. You have a glorious mix of metallics, you've got glitter, you've got gorgeous crystals, ceramics and much more besides. You've got some beautiful feature pieces in here as well. So today we're going to make the pair to this earring. I'm going to be working in one singular length of 18 gauge round wire. I've chosen to work with copper because it shows up well on the camera, and I have around about an 8-inch length. I've chosen one of these fabulous drum or cylinder beads, a gorgeous pear drop, two slightly smaller briolette or briolet cut crystals. I've got some spacers. I'm going to add in an extra ear wire and 3 head pins. I like to mix my metals, so I've got silver, copper and gold in one piece, but you can obviously change that up to your heart's content. So those are the materials we're working with. Let's pop this earring up into the corner. Now what you could do if you don't like a really elongated drop on your earrings, just show you this piece a bit more closely, is you could swap out this barrel or cylinder bead for a smaller bead from the collection if you prefer. You could go for one of these gorgeous sort of sandy earthy tones but with a little bit of glistening surface over the top. That's beautiful. So you can obviously always change up the projects, but that's the technique we're going to look at today from the Jessie James Beads Goddess Collection, Goddess Mayahuel. So as I say, I have around about 8 inches or so of that 18 gauge wire. I've ensured that both ends are flush cut. We're going to give that a very quick warm through. I'm going to be using a couple of tools today which you could improvise if you don't have access to them. I'm going to be using my 6-step bail making pliers. These are fabulous. I'm also going to be using a 1/2 inch dowel from a gorgeous collection of 6 rods. You could improvise if you don't have access to these, but they are so handy. I thoroughly recommend. So what we're going to do is just warm that wire through a little bit to begin with, and we're going to start about 1/3 of the way along with the smallest pin on those 6-step bail makers, and I'm going to make 3 loops that sit quite close together. Now one of the reasons I love my 6-step bail makers is because I can just pop that pin back in and straighten up those little wires going in either direction, and it makes it very easy to get a repeatable size on that shape. And you also get a lovely flat line going across your wire. Now when you're making earrings like this, it's really very much preferred if you do both of these sections at the same time. This will enable you to get an equal distance between your loops. I'm just going to eyeball it, as we say. What I'm going to do is bring that number 1 step on my stepped bail making pliers and just have a look and see if I can get the same sort of size and distance on those loops. Let's just spin that around, and then what we'll do is we'll just give that a quick squish, but before we set that solidly, we'll check to see if the distance is similar. So what I've done is I've made those a little bit too close together. I'll let you in on a secret. I've done that on purpose because it enables me to show you how to fix this issue. So if your loops are too close together, you can unwrap by just rotating those pliers around, moving that loop away a little bit, smoothing the wire as you go. We'll try that again, and you'll see that you're able to either move them closer together or further apart, just to get those at the same kind of distance apart. Albeit most earrings are worn on opposite sides of the head, so if there's a little bit of a discrepancy, it doesn't really matter. But I like to have them reasonably close in that distance being repeated. So let's add a 3rd loop onto this wire, draw that all the way around, and what I tend to do is drop that pin out, pop it in the opposite direction and just rotate that around again. You can withdraw the pin and have a look and see if you think that's a repeated size. Now, to help you get a straight line, if you pop the pin from your bail maker's back in the other side and just give that a little gentle wiggle, it will enable you to get everything nice and smooth and flat on that line. You can just give that a bit of a pinch whilst you're drawing the wire away, and then you can have a look. If you need to manually adjust that, you can use any chain nose pliers that you have. If you don't have access to those multi-step bail makers, although I do love them and use them every day, you can of course use standard round nose pliers. If you need help getting that size repeated, you can pop a little mark with a marker pen on the nose of your round nose pliers just to ensure that they're the same size. So you've got your 3 loops and it's offset to one side because we started around a third of the way along that length of wire. And what we're going to do now is just put a bit more warmth and heat into this little form. You can take a little bit longer to ensure you're happy that those are perfectly shaped and distanced apart from one another. Then we're going to find our nice solid round form. I'm going to be using that 1/2 inch mandrel, or if you prefer you can use a round form, maybe a lip gloss or a lip balm, something like that is an ideal size, something that you have around the house which is the right kind of diameter. What we're going to do is we're going to centralise the middle loop on that piece of round form or dowel, whatever you're using. Just going to make sure that we keep that nice and tame as we form that around, crossing those wires opposite to that central loop. And what I'll do is I'll get that into a reasonable form and just take that off to show you what I mean. So we've got a reasonably round form. You can see it's slightly deviating, so I'm just going to put a little bit more heat in there, pop it back onto the mandrel and then push it against that mandrel, pulling those 2 opposite wires. You should find that that forms up reasonably well before removing that away. What we're looking to do now is to make a right angle bend up at the top opposite that central loop. And if I grab hold of that with my bent chain nose pliers underneath, we're going to take the longer of our 2 wires up and away, and that needs to be approximately opposite that central round loop down at the bottom. Now, in order to give you a little bit of a chance, I've made a very, very soft bend to begin with, and that will enable you to see, let's pop this back onto the mandrel, how centrally you've got that bend making up. Well, I can see that it's a little bit too far over in this direction, so I can pop my pliers back in and just gently adjust where that angle comes away. That's now a much firmer bend and it looks exactly where I want it to be. So in order for me to make a really nice solid wrap with the shorter tail of wire, we're going to take this tail, the shorter tail, and wrap it around that central core wire. I'm going to put it back onto that pin or that mandrel and just push that around. I'll do it in small manoeuvres so you can see what we're doing and how we're achieving it. And what we would need to do is turn that around a good couple of times. I would say 3 to 4 times is adequate, but because you leave it on the mandrel when you're doing this, it enables you to get a nice tight coil. Sometimes if you're trying to coil the same gauge of wire, so this is all 18 gauge, going around an 18 gauge, it's a little bit difficult to get that neat and tidy, hence we leave it on the pin. So I'm going to go for 3 wraps of wire around that central core. Then I'm going to trim away the excess. So we have a little bit of spare wire. Put that to one side. You never know what you'll be able to do with that. And then we're just going to squish down to ensure that that sticky outy bit no longer sticks out. So very, very gently turn the pliers around in the direction that the wire moves, beg pardon. And that will smooth the end until it sits nice and flat. If you find that your coil is baggy, you can just very, very gently tighten that up. Wiggle your mandrel or your round form out of position and you should be left with your earring finding. I'm just going to centralise this up. If you find that it's gone slightly too short on one side, what you can do is just very, very gently turn in the opposite direction to the wrapping, and then you'll find that you can ease just a little bit of that wire back onto the form. So there's usually a way to fix things. The key is really to take your time, take a lot more time than I am, and try to get your right angle bend as central as possible. So whichever way you want to do that, we will just open that out ever so slightly, and that should then re-centralise that segment. So to add on the decoration for the upright part, we're going to put on one of our round spacer beads, and these are very chunky indeed. I think they're beautiful. Then I'm going to use the cylinder bead. As I mentioned earlier, you could indeed use a smaller bead, and then another one of those round spacers, or whichever one you want to use, to be honest. So I'm going to today teach just a very simple loop up at the top, an open and closable loop, by pushing a right angle directly at the top of that little stack of beads. Then we're going to use again the smallest or your round nose pliers just to create a round form up at the top. Let's draw that all the way around, tighten that up slightly and trim away the excess. So we started with about 8 or 9 inches, and you've got around about 1 inch and a bit of wire off either end. Both of those could come in useful later. Just centralise your loop, get that cut end to sit at that angle change at the top of that bead stack, and then you'll be able to add that into your earring finding when you're ready to. So I'm going to be using some little head pins today. I've gone for gold, and I'm just going to show you once how to add this on to one of the loops. So let's do the central one. Let's just get that to sit in position. Make sure that your bead isn't going to pass over the ball on the end of your head pin. And then we're going to draw the wire forwards very, very close to the top, but not directly on the top. I'm going to use the same pin on those multi-step bail makers all the way around. Trim away that tail at the point it crosses over. Look twice, cut once is the answer. And then before we add this on to your design, what we're going to do is make sure that we're really happy with how the loop looks. Ideally, I want that cut end to sit where the angle changes at the top of the bead stack. But before I add it onto the design, I'm going to give it a really hearty squish. So if you're going to use ready-made head pins, sometimes the wire is a little thinner than you might anticipate. We're going to open that up just like a jump ring so that you create that little gap. And we'll add that one into the middle loop. As I said earlier, you can take a lot more time than I do just to make sure everything is absolutely perfect. Loop that into the correct loop at the bottom of your earring design. And then you have got the second earring. So in a second, I'm going to add the last 2 beads in exactly the same way and that earring finding up at the top. And then I'll put a photograph just at the end for you.